Extremely important. Is my thing having trouble getting up there? Every once in a while the computer decides it's not ready to start, which is not all that comforting when you're trying to start something. Ed, I think you may have opened the wrong PowerPoint. That's the wrong one. That's the one from last week, or the week before, rather. While we're getting that part taken care of, it should be in the same folder, but it's for today's date. While we're doing that, I want to share with you a story in a moment. But I have to give you just a little bit of basis. The story is someone writing about their guitar. So, when I was reading this story about someone who was enamored by their guitar,
I'm sorry.
I couldn't figure out who to think of. No, I thought of Pastor Travis. And you'll understand the story, but I wanted Pastor Travis to do something for me this morning. I asked him to bring his nicest guitar and to just play a couple of chords on it so we could hear how beautiful it is. David, he's still on, right?
Yep.
All righty. Pastor Travis?
Hit it.
I asked him to play a few rich chords on there so that you could understand as we begin to go through the message this morning and through this particular story. He has to head back with the kids. Kids, he'll be there in just a second. The title of this morning's message technically was Where the Spirit of the Lord Is, This Societal Moment in His Image. Now that's a massively long title. It's completely wrong to make the titles that long, but I needed to because of all that we need to talk about and what we need to be able to say. It is where the Spirit of the Lord is. This is not just, our society's bad and all of that. What we're seeking to know is where the Spirit of the Lord is working.
Yes, sir.
And where He is working in this moment. I remember in 1987, there was a book entitled 88 Reasons Why the Lord Will Come Back in 1988. I remember in the fall of 1988, or maybe it was January of 1989, he released his second book, Why the Lord Didn't Come Back in 1988.
That's one way to do it.
There are moments in our history that are very important to us. I also remember the moment that I saw a plane, it was the second plane at that point, hit the World Trade Center. I was in the World Trade Center several years before that, and I was on the observation level. At that point, I could only look down and see clouds. Those were very, very tall buildings. I know that was a societal moment, a moment that we shared together, regardless of any of our feelings about things like that. There was a moment that we shared. My kids were 1,500 miles away. We had left them in West Virginia, close to Pittsburgh, with friends, and we were in Houston, Texas, when all of that happened. We are now in another societal moment. This moment is a little longer, however. I refer to it as a moment, but it's been coming for longer, and it is lasting longer than any of those kinds of things I just talked about. As I thought about the title, the last part of the title for this morning, In His Image, part of what Travis talked about last week, and he and I talked about that, was the fact that we're made in God's image. That's extremely important, and it's important for what we're doing today. But I adjusted the title, even after Ed printed it. I adjusted the title to On Purpose for a Purpose. We're talking about creation this morning and some of the related issues around it. So I wanted to share with you this story first, okay? If that's all right. The story is called The Grain of Truth Grows Slowly. And it was from Christianity Today. I don't always read that. Every once in a while I get a free issue. And I happened to read this one several months ago, and this just jumped out at me. Okay, so I want to read this to you. I can see that well enough, I think, so I'll give it a try. In her article, this lady says, she's talking about the grain of the wood, the grain of wood that's in her guitar. She's grown very fond of this guitar. It has scars and marks, and it's the grain of wood. So that's what we're talking about, is the grain of wood on her guitar. That's her basis for beginning this. She goes on to say, and this is about halfway through the article, there is a grain written in our design, each of us. And we have a skillful designer who first made us and is now forming us into who we are meant to be. Because she talked about who originally made the guitar and what's happened to it since then, and all of those things that changed the grain and changed the look of it. And she says at the end of her article, God will one day cause us to resonate his love like a well-tuned instrument, not on the merits of our performance, but through God's own hands, skillfully activating within us the melody of heaven.
Come on now. Yeah. Sweet. That's what I'm talking about.
This is our Creator, and it is important for us. This morning, I've chosen to do some definition and then have a video and some definition and a video. And I've got 4 of them. They're just short, though. They're about 1.5 minutes long each. But I want us to understand where we're at and where we're coming from. For any of you that have your bulletin with you, I encourage you on the back side of that little gray paper that tells you the order of service, there are plenty of lines there. I'm going to ask you to write some things down on it, and write whatever else you want, but I'm going to ask you to write a few things down to begin with. Because you need tools. You need tools. Your grandchildren, your children, your friends, your family, they've heard all of these kinds of things we're going to talk about today. So they know that what they're talking about is truth, except a lot of what they may be talking about is a lie. And it's a lie, unfortunately, that's taught in our higher learning colleges, universities, things like that, as just a foregone conclusion. But it's not. It's not. There's a lot of evidence, but the way you interpret evidence has a lot to do with your perspective. Has a lot to do with your perspective and the way you see things, because evidence doesn't simply say this is how you should look at something. I said something Wednesday night. If this sanctuary was not here in 1,000 years and there were still human beings around, and they came across the remains of this sanctuary, and all that was left was the concrete floor, they may say that in redesigning what we believe happened, then there's the platform over on this side of the sanctuary, or maybe they wouldn't even realize this was a church or what the purpose was for, because it is our perspective, our lens that we're looking through to interpret all the things that have happened. So, now you've got your piece of paper? Creation.org. Creation Magazine. ICR.org. Actually, I think creation might be .com, but I think both of them may work. There are a number of different organizations. ICR.org, and I'll tell you what ICR stands for. Institute for Creation Research, and I'll tell you why that's important. These are places you can go to find scientists, not preachers. Scientists with degrees who will teach you why creation biblical creation fits the facts better. Okay? I printed out 4 articles that I'm going to share bits and pieces of this morning. There are hundreds, and this is just on the creation website. Institute for Creation Research is in Dallas, Texas. If you ever have an opportunity to go there, they just recently opened a center there that's much like the Creation Museum that we went to, and some of the things that we saw in the Ark. All of those things are resources that you should avail yourself of. I've told you before, I believe that God created the earth in 6 days, 6 actual days, and that he rested on day 7, that 24-ish hour day. Our days are not exactly 24 hours anyway, they're close. But I have believed that since I was a kid, because the very first part of the Bible says that, and we're going to read through some of that. I believe that. But for so many years, I believed that, thinking that the only way that I could continue to believe that is to ignore the scientific facts. I believed it. But the facts seem so overwhelming. It's like, God, I need you to help me to understand how these two things match. Well, especially over the last several years, I've been able to do a lot of looking at research and things like that and all. That's why I was so excited to go to the Creation Museum and the Ark, and I would love to visit the Institute for Creation Research, their headquarters in Dallas. Both of these organizations, all 3 of these organizations, have offices all over the world. These are international groups. These are not, this little podunk group at this church of 20 people, and the pastors decided, hey, I don't need to worry about science. These are scientists, a lot of whom said we were evolutionists, until we started looking at the evidence and realized there's a much better explanation. So, long story short, hopefully, here's some definitions, and then we'll have a short video, and then we'll do some more definitions. Young Earth versus old Earth. Evolutionists and even some people who are considered evolutionary creationists or believe in theistic evolution, believe that our planet has been around for about 4.5 billion years. That helps because they can't answer a lot of questions about how we came about, how certain things that we know happen, entropy for one thing. We know that things have a tendency to break down, that, throw your brand new car out in the woods and see what happens in 10 years. It didn't make a Ferrari. It didn't just become something else. Well, give it millions of years and maybe it would. Except that's an issue of faith, all right? So, young Earth creationists believe that God formed the earth and then the planets and stars and the sun and the moon. And he did that about between 6,000 and 6,500 years ago. And the reason there's a little bit of gap there between those two things is when you take all of the genealogies from Genesis, according to how much longer someone lived or those kinds of things, there's some wiggle room. Not millions of years, just, between 6,000 and 6,500. That's not a lot of wiggle room for all the generations, but there's a little bit. But young Earth creationists believe that that's the best explanation for so much of what we're finding. One of the videos, I can't remember which one it is, talks a little bit about that. Now, I'll try not to tell you the things that the video will tell you in a minute and a half. Old Earth are those who believe that you need billions of years and millions of years for one thing to change into another thing. Creationism believes that God made things the way that he wanted them to be. Now, in the middle of that, I have to remind you God also created species and human beings with a genetic code. And the more we find out about genes, 20 years ago, we were beginning to learn about them. About 10 years ago, they finished mapping our genes, finally finished that project, those kinds of things, and they're discovering more and more things all the time. But God built into the genetic code of every creature the ability to adapt. Now, Darwin's theory of evolution is supposed to be based on those finches that he saw, and these finches needed a different type of beak in order to eat this particular food that was on this island where they were, as opposed to their counterparts on another island. He said, well, obviously, over millions of years, those birds could have come from dinosaurs, and those dinosaurs could have come from amoeba, because those are so simple. Well, what we're finding is that life is not simple. For those that are my age or around my age or older than me, know that in our textbooks, we had pictures of cells, and we had to copy those kinds of things and draw them and turn them into our teachers or whatever. And you've got a cell with a cell wall, and you've got a nucleus with the little things in there, and you've got maybe one or two other things that we've discovered. Now we've discovered that in our DNA, which is so much deeper in the DNA of every cell, there are chemical machines that operate and cause different chemicals to work. One of the videos I think that's playing out there, maybe the junk DNA, scientists in 1990, I think it was, talked about junk DNA, that there was so much of us, we were filled with junk DNA that had no real purpose and all of those kinds of things. Well, we've discovered they do have purposes. They work, those machines, to make things happen in our cells. So it's like, we know what this one does, but these 12 we don't. We know what this one does, but these 12 we don't. So they're just junk. They're left over from our evolution. We don't need them anymore, so that's why they're still there. But the deeper we look, the more we realize they had a purpose. They still have a purpose. They still continue to operate. And even some of what people have called our useless organs. Did you know your appendix has something to do with your immune system? That appendix that's completely vestigial. Your ancestors evolved and they didn't need it, and so you just still have it. But that's not true. They used to think the spleen was the same type of organ. And there's one or two others that they have a tendency to say these are vestigial and they have no real purpose, until they start to research and realize they still have lots of purpose. Can you live without your appendix? Yes, you can. I think it's on this side. You can live without your appendix, but it causes a problem. Can you live without your spleen? Yes, but it causes a problem. Can you live without your tonsils? Yes, but it causes problems that you have to be careful of. These are not junk things left over from evolution. And the more you dig into that, the more you realize that. I very purposefully wrote down the theory of evolution as the last of these four. Because the theory of evolution says that although we cannot observe it, and most science is observational science, you can repeat it. If I pick up this glass pumpkin and I throw it on this concrete floor, it will break. I could do that over and over and over to any whole pumpkin that I had, and it would do the same. That is a repeatable, observable thing. What I cannot tell you is where the clay came from that decided to get together and make this and fire itself in a hot enough place to make it ceramic. Well, I can't observe that, but there are those that can observe this. But when you go farther back, you get to places where we're not observing things anymore. We're making conjectures. And the places where we can't fill in the gaps, by faith, we believe that those things take place. So, evolution, the theory of evolution, is a faith. It is a religion because you have to take a lot of those things on by faith. There are a whole lot of things about the creation of the universe and about the creation of human beings and different animals and things like that. This is weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks worth of stuff. Okay? That's why I gave you those websites and things like that, because I want you to be informed and to have tools and to know where you can go to have tools, because this is not just some wacky pastor talking about how that idiotic thing of believing what's in Genesis. You know. I was listening to a podcast the other day from Creation Magazine, and the two people were talking about, they actually played a clip from a professor at a university, a religion professor at a university. I don't remember the name of his name or where he was or any of those kinds of things, but he's a well-known professor. And he said in an interview that he was doing with someone else, and it was televised, so they had the clip from it. He said, it is so preposterous that over 50% of pastors believe in the Genesis story. How preposterous and backwoods that many pastors actually believe that. That was his statement. So what I want you to know today, you don't have to check your brain at the door to believe in creation. You don't have to check your brain at the door to believe that God said it and it is actually true.
Right.
You don't have to check your brain at the door and think, well, this is not really history. Well, it's not a history book, but where it touches history, it's correct. It's not a scientific text, but where it touches science, it's correct. And you can say that with confidence, not because some pastor said it who doesn't know one thing from the other, but because scientists have proven it. They say, this is the best explanation. You don't have to jump through hoops to believe this is correct. So don't check your brain. Use it. Use it. And look at the evidence. Both of the guys on the Creation Magazine podcast were evolutionists. They have their university degrees from big universities, and they worked in the field. And they said the more that they experimented and did research, the less evolution made sense, because there's so many places where you just have to say, that just happened. Well, it just happened. How'd you get? Just happened. I can tell you some things that just happened. God spoke. And he created all that is. And it happened. But I can tell you that with the knowledge that I can also tell you that the very same God provided salvation for human beings. How do I know that's true? I've experienced it because I was one way and now I'm another, and he's the one in the middle. I love that phrase from the Chosen. And it's so true. We know it by experience. That what he says is true because what he has done was impossible. Except it wasn't, because it's God. And he does the impossible. So, here's the first video. I'm going to preach the whole sermon before I ever get far enough down here. So,
go ahead, preach.
Just how old is the universe? Well, it doesn't have an expiration tag, but we can make some estimates by looking at things in our universe, like the moon. As the moon orbits the Earth, its gravity pulls on the oceans, causing tides. And as the tides pull on the moon, they cause it to move about 1.5 inches away from the Earth each year. That means that 6,000 years ago, the moon would have been about 800 feet closer to the Earth. Not a problem. But if the Earth and moon were over 4 billion years old, then they would have been touching, and that wouldn't have been good. So the moon shows that the universe is several thousand years old. That makes sense when we also look at comets. They lose large amounts of material each time they pass around the sun, so they wouldn't even be around after billions of years. And the inner regions of spiral galaxies rotate pretty fast. If the galaxies and the universe altogether were billions of years old, they'd be too twisted up to look like they do now. So everywhere we look in the universe, we see evidence that shows that what the Bible says about its age is consistent, and that the heavens really do declare the glory of the Lord.
Hoorah.
Institute for Creation Research. So, got a few more definitions to look at. Macroevolution and microevolution. Macroevolution is what's taught as evolution, which would say that amoeba eventually became a four-legged creature that was losing its tail and decided to walk out of the water that it was in, or the ooze that it came out of. And eventually, given enough millions of years, that became the T-Rex dinosaur, which eventually, through millions of years, became a bird.
Okay.
Well, that's the order. Birds are supposedly from dinosaurs, and not the flying dinosaurs, which I always thought was funny. The flying dinosaurs are not the ones that they say are the ancestors of birds.
They flew.
But that's macroevolution. We have never seen any evidence for macroevolution. None.
So, theory.
In hundreds of years of looking specifically for the missing link, that transition between that four-legged creature with a tail that walked out and that dinosaur, or whatever happened, you've got nothing in between, no transitional creatures. In the fossil record, what you see are that animals, that life appears suddenly and stays the same. And there's no evidence for other than that. The only evidence that there has ever been for macroevolution is when people mistakenly or purposefully
Suddenly appeared.
take this little thing and say, I can tell you this whole creature and what they looked like and what transition they were from this much evidence. And then we find another piece of this attached to something else and realize, oh, that wasn't that at all. All of that other stuff was conjecture, faith, imagination. Have you ever heard of Lucy, the missing link? You should go to the Creation Museum and see the display. It was one of the ones that just affected me the most. The pieces, they have the whole reconstruction of Lucy the way that evolutionists have her. She's supposed to be a cross between an ape and a human being, a missing link between the for evolution. However, they have this part of her arm bone, this part of a leg bone, and a quarter of her skull. That's all that's ever been found. The rest of it is conjectured on top of it. Now, not just that, but when evolutionists want that to look like that missing link, they change the way that it looks on the outside. How many of you have ever seen a real skull? Or at least a plastic version of a real skull? Okay? Do you know what color eyes the person with the skull had? Do you know if they were hairy or smooth skin?
You just know they're
At all. You just don't know hardly anything from a skull. Okay? From a piece of a skull, they've reconstructed, and what I liked in the display at the Creation Museum was an artist's reconstruction on a mold of the skull pieces that they found. And you've got one that looks like an orangutan. Okay? Very much like a monkey, got the monkey nose and the whole 9 yards. But you realize this is all cartilage, right? So what's there with your skull is just two big holes. Okay? All the rest of that's on top of that. But the middle one is what they say Lucy looked like. She was a little bit like an ape, but with a little bit more human features. Another artist took the very same mold and placed on it facial features that made it fully human, just because of their imagination between them. So was it a missing link? No. It's not a missing link. It's just an ape that you wanted to seem more human. So when you reconstructed, when you did your pictures, your drawings, and when you reconstructed on top of the pieces of skull, you made a lot of extrapolations. All right? Macroevolution, there's been no evidence for it. And any time evidence has been brought forward, it has been debunked because it's not truthful. You can't take my pinky bone and figure out how tall I was or what I looked like and whether I was an ape or a human being, because hands, there are several creatures, many creatures who have hands that are very much like ours. We're going to talk about the hand here in a second. Microevolution, however, is part of what God designed in our DNA. We do know some of these observable facts. You know, back when our nation was created, that a man that was 6 feet tall would have been a giant. There were some around the time that our nation was created. But most men, the average men, most of the people that we know from the founding of our country a few hundred years ago, would have been somewhere between 5'6" and 5'8". Wouldn't have been 6 feet tall. We adjust. Now, there are other people, there have been giants down throughout the centuries, but those kinds of changes do take place. Birds' beaks can change from generation to generation, but they don't become something else. Features change. If you live in an area where the sun is bright all the time, successive generations may have a thicker brow bone to provide more shade. Now that's successive generations. Does that mean that you started off as an ape or that you were an amoeba or eventually you'll be a superhuman? No, it means that there's a feature that changes because your DNA was created by God to adapt to your environment. How many of you have lived in the North Pole area? You ever lived there? Some of you have gotten fairly close, but did you know that people there have developed, because generation after generation they're there, they've developed different things than you and I have here? Did you know even as simply as our blood changes consistency when we live in a cold climate to when we live in a warm climate? I don't know how you survived in Indiana. But when I was living up north, I could take it. I didn't like the cold, but I could take it. I remember the first couple of winters that I was down here, I wore a lightweight jacket because it never got cold compared to where I was living before. Now I've been here for 18 years. It gets cold. When we went to the Bahamas in February, and it was 60 degrees and we were comfortable. They're wearing parkas. Big, heavy parkas. Because they don't live in a climate where it's very cold. We do adapt. Animals and creatures do adapt, but there's no evidence that there's any adaptation beyond microevolution that changes a little feature here, a little feature there, so that we're better able to adapt to our environment. The Creator created us that way. That's part of what those DNA machines do. The fossil record is supposed to prove that it had to be billions and billions of years. The fossil record is supposed to be, supposedly, and uniformitarianism, the massive word, it just means what you observe now had to have always been exactly the same way it was happening before. In other words, if you see that sediment builds up a tiny layer and it takes years and years for that to build up over this little lake bed before it dries up or whatever, that's the way it always was. Everything had to happen that way. So a lot of uniformitarianism has been debunked even by evolutionists, however, because they say catastrophes had to happen for some things to happen. Well, the Bible describes a catastrophe that happened, okay? Evolutionists say there had to have been a catastrophe, or lots of catastrophes, but the fossil record isn't this easy thing. Well, we know this is this many years because not only does it not have a price tag or a date tag, we see things like the Grand Canyon and realize that if the evolutionary view of how the Grand Canyon was carved over time were true, it would be very difficult because the river would have had to flow uphill before it could cut into the rock. And generally speaking, that's opposed to gravity. But something that would explain it is this massive deluge of water that covered the planet, that over the course of just about a year, it covered the planet and washed away. Now, if you want a modern example of that, some observable science, look for information on Mount St. Helens where those kinds of things actually did happen. It erupted. It was going to take millions of years for things to fossilize. They fossilized in a couple of decades down in the lakes and different things. The trees came back. They said it would be thousands and thousands of years before they came back. And then after Mount St. Helens had erupted and caused all that problem, there was another eruption that caused a Grand Canyon-like canyon when one of the lakes, the rim of one of the lakes, ruptured because of the eruption. It broke open and formed a canyon. One of the problems with the Grand Canyon model being a model for evolution is that there are only a few canyons around the world, a handful. But when we dig deeply in the ground and we keep going down, when we see layers like this, we should see some canyons in there as well that have been filled in, and we don't see that. That's not part of what we see. We've not found those kinds of things. Over billions of years, there should have been thousands and thousands of canyons that had been filled over millions of years, and you could see that evidence, but we don't. We don't see that evidence. So uniformitarianism has been debunked even by evolutionists. The transitional forms is something that's in between one species and the other. And then variation is simply another way of talking about microevolution. We are generally, as a species, taller than we were a few hundred years ago. However, we're not the tallest generations. There have been generations that were taller. We've had bad health, bad diet, those kinds of things, and that goes down a little bit and then it goes back up. Those kinds of things have been seen over time. Let me let you see this video, and that'll help you a little bit as well.
Do fossils really show that creatures gradually evolved from simple to complex? The late fossil expert and evolution defender Stephen Gould recognized they didn't. He said the fossil record shows two clear features. One, sudden appearance, and two, stasis. When a new creature is discovered in the fossil record, it shows up suddenly and fully formed, with no gradual forms that led up to it. That's sudden appearance. Then its basic form stays the same. It doesn't evolve. And that's stasis. All kinds of fossilized creatures show sudden appearance and stasis, including creatures like crinoids, mosasaurs, beardworms, horseshoe crabs, lobsters, and trilobites. Rather than gradual evolution, the fossil record shows each animal form suddenly appears. Trilobites have perfectly formed body parts right from the start. They show up suddenly with no ancestors and have some of the most complex eyes that ever existed on Earth. Does that sound like slow, gradual evolution? They first occur in Cambrian rocks, which often represent the first deposits from Noah's flood. But even when found high above Cambrian rocks, trilobites still look like trilobites, as though they were created to reproduce more of their own kind. In The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin hoped future fossil finds would show examples of in-between creatures demonstrating evolution. So far, it's just more stasis. Creatures appear suddenly, fully formed, and they keep the same form. And that's what we'd expect to find. God's fully formed creation we read about in the book of Genesis.
Yep.
I'll be faster. Climate change. I'll let him talk to you about that. The Ice Age. We do believe that there was an Ice Age. Evolutionists believe there were many, many Ice Ages, and they believe that because they need billions of years, or millions of years rather, for the ice to build to glacial stages. However, what is required for glaciers to form, which would cause the Ice Age, is warm oceans and a mild summer. So the warm oceans cause lots of moisture in the air, and in colder climates that would fall as snow. You'd need a fairly warm winter for it to continue to accumulate. That's best explained by what happened with the flood, because the oceans would have been warmer following the flood and all of the breaking up of the deeps and the volcanic and movement of the tectonic plates and things like that. That would explain a warm ocean, as well as the ash in the air and things like that would explain milder summers and things like that. And we have had an Ice Age. It wasn't millions and millions of years ago, and it wasn't the 20th or 100th or 1000th one that we've had. The other part is stewardship. Just because we don't believe, let me put this very personally, I believe that humanity is incapable of destroying the planet. I don't believe God put that in our power. I believe that He created things the way that they are that could withstand even some of our stupidity. However, do I believe that we should be better stewards of what He has given us? Yes. We talk about the shortage of water. Have you ever been to an ocean? I'm so surprised about some of those things. Now, there are places that used to be wet places that are now arid places. I get that. Those things change. Those things move around. And if we can help have a better environment, I love trees. I like places with trees. I hate to see places people come through and say, hey, we're going to build something. We cut down every tree for acres and acres and acres. But there's a reason for that. Trees and plants produce oxygen. It's the way that God created the planet to help sustain life. And I think, if you live in the South, I don't know why you would cut down all the trees, because you need shade, people. You need shade.
Yes, sir.
So I believe we're supposed to be good stewards. However, do I believe that we could destroy the planet? I don't really believe that we have the capability of doing that. We've blown up nuclear bombs underground, and we've caused some problems there. However, even the deepest trenches, the deepest mines that we have built, barely scratch the surface of the planet that God created.
Yes.
I just don't think we can do it. But I think we should be good stewards of what we have. He told us to tend the garden. He didn't tell us to burn it all down. So I think that we should be good stewards and realize that we are stewarding this planet. It was an inheritance from our grandparents, and it is the inheritance we want to give to our grandchildren. There's nothing wrong with that. But a human life is more important than a tree.
Yes.
Come on.
And unfortunately, in the climate change issue, there are those who say that we need a whole lot less people on the planet so the planet can sustain us. And I don't believe that's the right direction for that equation.
No, sir.
And I don't believe it's biblical. So here's another short video. I'll try to be shorter with my explanations.
Climate change heats up the headlines, but is the Earth really getting warmer? Well, sort of. A warming trend existed for much of the 20th century, likely the last 30 to 50 years. But this warming trend leveled off in 1998. Some scientists and many activists claim that humans produce carbon dioxide, which causes global warming. They often point to the famous hockey stick diagram used in the 90s to supposedly prove their point. But research shows that the rise in CO2 actually happened after the Earth's temperature started rising. That means CO2, man-made or otherwise, did not cause the warming after all. And two significant changes in climate occurred within the last 1,000 years: the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age. Both changes happened before human industry could have influenced climate. So it's much more likely that climate change occurs naturally. For example, climate physics link fluctuating solar outputs to Earth's temperature. Should responsible citizens blame themselves for global climate change? Science has not yet ruled out human activity as playing a small role, but factors far beyond man drive most or all climate change. But it does matter that we take care of Earth, not because our failures could completely wreck the environment, but because God placed us here to take care of His creation and to know and enjoy Him through the things that have been made. Romans 1:20.
Amen.
Okay. Design, function, chance, decay, order, purpose, transhumanism. God has designed every creature and every system on the planet so it works perfectly. One of the videos that you can find that's not part of one of the ones that I'm using today, or even in the foyer, which has 6 different videos. Scientists, no matter what ilk they're from, creationist or evolutionist, believe that we live on a Goldilocks planet. Everything was just right. Just right for life, just right for this, just right for that. As if, and some, evolutionists don't go this far, creationists say as if a designer designed it that way. And we work together with the environment. We do that, and it works together. We believe in design, that God designed us, and we are so, the further, the deeper, the more microscopic we get a look at people and creatures, the more amazed we are at how it lines up with Scripture. Noah, Moses, Abraham, they didn't know what a human genome was, okay? But what we know about human genes today lines up with God's inspired word, that He created us on purpose, for a purpose. We have function, amazing function, and the next video is about one of those things that we have that has such a function. But evolution believes that everything happened as a part of chance. Chance was involved in everything. And it takes a lot of faith to believe that as things die and break down, that somehow something better comes out of it. And one of the things that I had watched, has a picture of this beautiful 1910 or 1915 truck in mint condition. And then the same truck that's kind of dirty and whatever parked out in a farm, and then another one after it's been out sitting in the field and the farm and the grass is growing up and it's rusted to pieces. Things don't get better. We don't observe any of that. That doesn't ever happen. Things break down and decay. God created our universe and our planet and all the life on it with order. What reason would a plant have to become an oxygen producer and use carbon dioxide? There's not a lot of logical reasons for that, because the plant couldn't have survived from carbon dioxide without enough organisms that breathed oxygen and breathed out carbon dioxide. One couldn't have happened without the other. God designed it. There's an order, and He designed it on purpose. And He designed us with a purpose. Every single one of us with a purpose. And I will hammer that till the day I'm dead. God created every one of us for a purpose, and you can say the circumstance of your conception, blah, blah, blah. None of that matters. Not every time that potential is there does a life form. God created every person for a purpose.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, transhumanism, I'm only going to touch on it. It is a massive thing. Basically, this is what it is. And you can find some of the videos at What Would You Say, at creation.com, at Creation Magazine, at ICR. You can find things about transhumanism. And one of the short videos from What Would You Say I thought was very informative. Transhumanism is basically this. The difference between we break a bone and the bone heals and it becomes like new again, with a little bit of problems. We realize that may cause arthritis and different kinds of things like that. That's basically how things work. That's how our health system works. That's, we try to get people back to optimum health. Transhumanism is the thought that we can add to the human computers, microcomputers, microorganisms, manufactured things. mRNA is one of those types of things in the beginning, so that we can augment humanity so they'll be better and stronger and faster. Think bionic man, bionic woman. Or if you're a science fiction fan and this reference doesn't go completely over your head, think the Borg. That's what transhumanism is that we could be augmented to be better because we've had mechanisms of one type or another added to us. Oftentimes, and you would like to think that's science fiction, but all of those kinds of research are actually going on and people can do a lot of those things already. Unfortunately, humanity seldomly asks the question, just because we can do something, should we do something? They seldomly ask that question. They usually go ahead and do it and eventually say, there might be a problem now that we've already done it and we've already made it possible. Somebody might use that badly. Go figure. That's transhumanism in a tiny nutshell. But I believe that God created, and He did a great job at creating.
Perhaps no tool in the world is as versatile and useful as the human hand.
You got
Its
one, right?
details constantly display real design. For example, finger bone lengths follow the proportions of the Fibonacci number sequence. The sum of the smallest two segments of a finger equals the length of the third, and the sum of the second and third equals the length of the fourth bone. Your hand is a mobile golden spiral, perfectly balancing strength and dexterity. Also, extended fingers squeezed against one another show the offset knuckles meshing. If knuckles lined up, they'd rub uncomfortably and space fingers too far apart. Muscles that control the hand actually reside in the forearm instead of the palm, leaving space to hold an object or another person's hand. A large amount of your brain is dedicated to controlling hand muscles. This means that grip control combinations are nearly infinite and remarkably versatile. For example, a construction worker can easily curl 3 fingers around a bucket handle in a loose endurance grip. At the same time, his thumb can press a note card tight to his index finger, while his pinky hooks a plastic sack. Simultaneously,
Ever been to the grocery
his
store?
other hand can curl its last 3 fingers and press the palm firm over the fingertips, locked in a power grip to carry a heavy hammer, while the thumb and index finger gently pluck up a potato chip without crushing it. And how do people type so fast? The brain plans finger movements 3 actions ahead of time. Intervals between keystrokes are often as brief as 60,000ths of a second. So it makes sense for the Lord Jesus to use the skill, strength, and awesome connecting power of our hands to express His love. He promises that His hands will guide, uphold, and faithfully keep His own in His powerful grip.
All right. Yes, sir.
Did you know your hand was that fantastic?
Of course I did.
We use them like that all the time. I've used this pinky a little bit too much for that bag holding thing, and sometimes it hurts. Creationism versus evolution. Young Earth creationism, and it is young Earth creationism. There are about 6 different types of creationism and evolution that shuffle into slightly different categories. But young Earth creationism is the scientific study that utilizes the biblical creation narrative as the basis for interpreting evidence for the origin of the universe, earth, life, and design. These are our scriptures this morning. I won't go through all of it because the first one is 31 verses long. It says, in the beginning, God created, and all of the things that he created. Chapter 2 goes into how he created humans out of the dust of the ground, and we get more of that as you skip through the parts of Genesis. I do want to go to John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, just read a little bit of that one. All of these should be in your bulletin. I encourage you to read them. I apologize that it's just going to take a little too long if I don't move. In the beginning, and this is in John's inspired gospel about Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. And then jump down just a little bit in that to verse 18. No man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. Yes. And then move with me to Colossians. Colossians, one of those letters. Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. Colossians 1, verses 16 and 17. These are different authors, by the way, but remember, it is inspired by the Holy Spirit. Verses 16 and 17 of Colossians chapter 1. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. Yes. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist or continue to function. Here are some truths of these passages that I think are important for us to remember. 1, God spoke everything into existence.
Yes, he did. Period.
God spoke everything into existence. A fully formed, fully functional world.
Yes, sir.
Everything worked the way it was supposed to work. And I always find it fascinating that he created light and darkness before there was a sun and a moon and stars. Yes. 2, God made everything in 6 normal days. There's really no reason to try and make the Bible fit an evolutionary timetable, because the evolutionary timetable doesn't make good sense. Scientists have determined it doesn't make good sense. The only reason people stick with it is because they're too scared to stand against it. Because it is one of those absolutes you can't believe otherwise. Everybody knows that evolution is real. Except when you look at the evidence, you realize it's probably one of the least effective and least logical reasons for why things are the way they are. 3, God made mankind especially in his image. You are not an animal. You are not an animal. You are a human being. You are the pinnacle, the top of God's created universe. There is not another creature in existence that has the ability to make moral choices, that has the ability to be creative, that has the ability that the human mind has.
Yes, sir.
We are not animals. And here's why that matters. Evolution says it was chance. You came from animals. You're no different than animals. You've just evolved farther, which means, 1, you weren't created on purpose. You were just chance. You happened to come about. So if you decide to kill yourself, what's the big deal? If you get run over by a car, what's the real big deal? If we have to get rid of 3/4 of the population of the planet, what does it matter? The planet's so much more important. God made mankind especially in his image.
Yes, sir.
And you are part of that.
Yes, yes.
And that's not a sexist use of that term. Man is humanity. Mankind is humanity. It has nothing to do with gender. Even in the Bible, where he says he made man, he says he made them male and female. Right from the beginning, he uses it as the term to cover the whole population. And it bothers me when people feel the need to always try to be so inclusive in our language. They damage our language when they do things like that. So God made mankind especially in his image. Because God is the creator, he sets the rules.
That's right. Come on. That's right.
And because he sets the rules, we have to abide by them. Another reason that people prefer evolution. If there's no God that makes the rules, then whatever I decide is good enough, because if it feels good, do it. Next, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, is the word by which all things are created. And then everything was made by him, for him. We have a purpose. We have a purpose. We were made to worship. We were made to bring honor and glory to the Creator. Bears and chimpanzees can't decide to worship God. People can. People can make moral choices and decisions. We can think about the future, and we can understand the past. We are unique among all of his creation. And in these passages of Scripture, here again, I'll only read a few of them. I apologize for that. Psalm 139, and we're actually kind of counting backward in the Psalm, so we start off toward the end. Psalm 139. 139 verses 13 through 18. Another one of the Psalms of David. Psalm 139 verses 13 through 18 says, "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect or incomplete. And in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned.
All right.
I continued to develop, when as yet there was none of them. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee."
Yes.
Amen.
Right.
Aren't you glad for that?
Yes, sir.
He is amazing who he is and what he has done. And the world and this evolutionary viewpoint discounts all of that. Tries to destroy who God is and what he has created in us. How many of you have ever seen the famous transition, or the famous picture of the gestation of different creatures, that the embryos all look the same? You know, this one's a chicken and this one's a dog and this one's a human over here. You've seen that? Those have also been debunked because initially they were an artist's rendition. The scientists did the illustrations and purposefully left out things that made them different. A scientist more recently has taken photographs of those same creatures, including a human being, at the same point in their gestation, and the differences are extremely obvious. So what did an evolutionary scientist do? He wrote an article. He wrote an article to debunk the photographs because it doesn't fit their narrative. chapter 36, verses 6 through 11, or 33, 6 through 11. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as an heap. He layeth up the depth in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. The Lord bringeth the counsel of the heathen to naught, or nothing. He maketh the devices of the people of none effect. The counsel of the Lord standeth forever, the thoughts of his heart to all generations. And Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6. Nineteen, 1 through 6. And this is not the only psalm that has the heavens declare the glory. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. What does that mean? It means look at the creation. Can't you see that it is bigger and greater and more magnificent and more designed than it could have happened by chance? There had to have been a creator. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. And he's specifically talking about the sun there. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 12. Isaiah 45, 12. Go back toward the New Testament. Not very far, but Isaiah 45, verse 12. Get my fingers to work right. Holding this, turning pages, holding it. Yeah. Verse 40, chapter 45, verse 12. I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded. And then way back in the last book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 4. Revelation chapter 4, verse 11. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created.
Yes. Amen. You can see that again.
Here's a few things we need to remember from those passages of Scripture. Every human being is fearfully and wonderfully made for God's glory. You can't tell me otherwise with any confidence. I won't believe it. I have read too much. I have seen too much. Even the Genius of Ancient Man, this book from Creation Museum, fascinating what God has done. We are fearfully and wonderfully made for God's glory. All the world should stand in awe of God. The heavens declare his glory. Look around. Pick up a leaf. Get a microscope and see deeper than you could see with the naked eye. And every depth you get to is more and more complex. So many evolutionary theories are based on science that says we can see these things and obviously there's nothing further deeper in. But as we've seen deeper and deeper and deeper, we realize nothing could have happened without a creator who made it. And every part of the world should stand in awe of God. God is greater than all the wisdom of mankind. Yep. He even says he uses the foolishness of preaching to help people understand. So, can't get too high on that horse there. So the very heavens declare the glory of the Lord. Everything that exists was created by God for his glory. The Lord is worthy to receive all glory, all honor, all power from his creation, the creation that he spoke into existence. And every scientific discovery we make, the Bible makes more sense. You don't have to jump through hoops. Ask Stephen Hawking, well, before he passed away. Ask Stephen Hawking where the origin of the universe came from. And basically, in a very thick book, he goes through lots of gobbledygook and basically says, we really don't know, and it's kind of impossible that it even happened. Thank you for being so smart and not being able to recognize God created it. You see, one of his earlier books actually had to end with saying there must have been an intelligent designer. Because time doesn't have a mind or volition to make things happen. Chance doesn't either. And all of those things are supposed to be responsible. If our galaxy was billions of years old, like they say it should be, then things should be very different. The deeper you delve into the science of space or the science of things on the earth or the science of geology, the deeper you get into all of these things, the less evolution makes sense. Did you know, you probably didn't because it never makes the headlines, did you know that the recent dinosaurs have been found that still contain blood cells and skin cells? Those things don't last millions of years. But we found them. We've been testing their DNA. Yeah, because they have those things still in them. That biological matter can't last all of that time. It just doesn't make sense. The world is made up of creatures and even microorganisms that take care of breaking down things as they die and they decay. That's called decay. I mean, the dung beetle has a favorite pastime. And there are so many other things, creatures that I want nothing to do with, but they're part of the system that God set up. Millions and millions of years wouldn't work. It would be impossible for that to happen, even given all of that time. But we are created. We are created beautifully and wonderfully made to fear God. And yes, fear is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Why is that? Because all he had to do was speak. And he created the universe. So when he says this is how things are to be, we need to realize he's the one that gets to decide what happens to me. He's the one that gets to decide my fate. That is fear of him. But the amazing thing is that he's also full of grace and mercy. And nothing separates us from his love. Can you imagine what that means for those who choose to reject him and end up in hell? His love never stops loving them. Depth of him and his majesty and glory, that is amazing. So I have a question for you, because we're from several different generations in here, and we need to be honest about these things with ourselves. Have you bought the lie that you're simply a blind result of chance?
No.
That humanity, you included, is just blind chances that happened over millions and millions of years, and there's no real purpose for you? Do you really think that the science supports that? It doesn't. It really doesn't. I'm not just preaching the Bible because, hey, I believe this by faith and science just doesn't matter. What I've come to discover is the more science we delve into, the more the story of creation makes sense. And the second question is one you have to answer between you and God. Are you ready to live for the glory of the one who created you for his own purpose?
Yes, sir.
That means your selfishness, and I'm going to be my own God and whatever. You can't do that. He created you for a different purpose. Recognizing that he created you for a purpose and recognizing that that purpose is the very best use of the material that you are should cause us to want Him to direct our life. But even Adam and Eve in the garden decided, well, the serpent said we could be like God. Let's do this thing that God said don't do. What's the worst that could happen? I believe in the God who spoke all that is into existence. I believe that the more we learn, the greater our understanding that it makes the most sense of the evidence. I've studied an enormous amount of stuff, hours and hours and hours and hours of stuff, and I want to be able to share all of it with you. But the bottom line is, God created. And we have been created on purpose for a purpose.
Yes.
Don't let the enemy rob you of that. God has not forgotten you. God has not put you off to the side because He was hoping that you'd just kind of get out of His hair. God loves you with a love that won't let go, and has a purpose for you that is the very best use of the material that is you. And He knows you. He's not asking you to do something that's far beyond you. Tracy's working with Travis this morning, back with the kids. But I listened to Tracy pray a prayer at our El Paso missions trip. It was beautiful. She's scared to death to do stuff in front of people. That's okay. Because when God says, I want you to do this, He knows that He's already created you with that ability. Yes. That you may have no idea. I've told you my own story. I love to sing. I enjoy singing. I do that now. But at 15, it scared the living daylights out of me. And barely could I stand and sing because somebody had asked me to sing for the Easter program. And I thought, there's no way. I can't do that. God said, yeah, but I know what I've created you for. He did that for Debbie. Debbie, you're not a Bible teacher. You're not a stand up in front of people and talk. And God said, but I want you to be the teacher for these people at Midway. And God's blessed that and honored that. Do you know what happens when we recognize I don't feel like I can? God says, good. Because that means you want me to fill you and keep doing it through you. Because when I think I can, that stops. And it's just us. God has a purpose and a plan for you and for every one of our children and for every person on this planet. And I think that one of the worst, most devastating lies of the enemy is the development of the theory of evolution. Because at every turn, it damages our understanding of God and who we are as human beings. And it takes constant knocks against the Bible and the creation and humanity. We are the pinnacle of God's creation. And God did that on purpose. And we have different skin colors and languages, and all of those are easily explained by the Bible. And none of those says one is better than the other. It says we were all created in His image for His purpose and for His glory.
Yes.
So I want to encourage you to live out that story in your factory, in your business, in your home, in school, wherever you are, in all the things that you do. As we celebrate Thanksgiving this week, as we go to stores and we shop, remember that humanity was created in the image of God, and He has a purpose and a plan for every person. And if we got that, how deep and rich and full of life we would really be.
Yes.
Stand with me if you would, please. Let's bow our heads together. Lord, I pray that you would take all of the fire hose of information and that you would dig deeply into the very heart of who we are. And that you would teach us. Help us to know that we were created by you for your glory. And make us truly thankful. Help us to live like the pinnacle of your creation. And to bring others toward you. To help them to see you at work in us. And to remind them that he wants to work in them too. Help us today. Guide and direct our thoughts and our actions. We ask it all in your precious name, Jesus. Amen.
Yeah.
God bless you.